Welcome to the Wise and Happy Life podcast, where ancient wisdom meets modern science, and mindfulness, philosophy, and happiness practices blend with neuroscience, compassion, and common sense. Hosted by Bob Martin, meditation mentor, happiness coach, trial lawyer, and entrepreneur. This podcast explores how to live with grace, presence, and purpose in a complex world.
Hey, hello, good people, and welcome to another episode of A Wise and Happy Life. And, I like to call the podcast A Wise and Happy Life because real happiness depends a little bit on the wisdom that we pick up in the world. And today I have a most amazing guest, Pastor Allen Cudahy. And his story is something I think all of us have either experienced or dreamt about. Following our path, following it, and building something, and then all of a sudden making a major change in the middle of our lives to do something else and have that work out as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. So without anything else said, let me just introduce Pastor Allen Cudahy, who presently is living in Costa Rica, and we're happy to have him here. Say hi, Allen.
Thank you, Bob. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about where you are right now.
I am in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, just a few minutes from many wonderful beaches here in this part of northwest Costa Rica. I've lived here for 15 years now, and I got to tell you, I love this country. I love the people. I love everything about Costa Rica.
Yeah, let's take a moment and just let the folks know a little bit about this really wonderful country. It's, I'll go on, but you can add whatever you like. It is situated in the southern part of Central America, in between Nicaragua and Panama. It is a complete country, and so it has a border on the south, a border on the north, but the Caribbean Sea on the west and on the east, and the Pacific Ocean on the west. And Costa Rica had a little invasion from a group of mercenary Nicaraguans back in the 40s, and they repelled that invasion, and it was so distasteful to them that they decided that they would outlaw armies. And so Costa Rica declared itself to be neutral. It outlawed the army. It put much of that money into its educational system. And the folks there have much more of a North American work ethic than you'll find in many other parts of Central and Latin America. Would that be about right?
That's very good. We're known as the Switzerland of Central America, with really that emphasis on peace and no standing army, and it's a very pleasant change.
So tell us a little bit about you're a pastor, obviously. That's why we call you Pastor Allen. And usually folks that wind up being pastors feel that there was a call to that. Is that true for you?
Absolutely. Sort of a slow, relentless call.
Wait a second. Hold on. Let me just take a break. Okay, so we're back, and we took a little break there because there was some construction going on. And, Pastor Allen, there's mostly I would have just broken and started over and let the editors take all that out. But I wanted to leave some of that construction sound in. You're smiling because you know what I'm getting at, because that's really important to our story. But you know what? Let's not reveal why.
Okay.
Just yet. Okay. So let's go back and what you were mentioning was that the call to be a man of God was a long process, and I think you said that it started early.
First started revealing itself in high school. You get to be junior or senior in high school, you start thinking, okay, what do I want to do with my life? What occupation do I want? Where do I want to go to school? And I really started having a lot of really varied interests. I thought maybe, like you, I wanted to be a lawyer early on. I thought
Mm-hmm.
it would be cool to be a judge, in fact. I thought I had, at a young age, I thought I had some wisdom. I could make some of those calls. And that just, at least from watching, Law and Order on TV, I always like resonated with the judge.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then I got to school in Southern California, having grown up there near Seattle, and really found my geology classes super interesting. And a lot of my friends were studying geology, so I ended up getting actually a minor, and really was fascinated with the age of the earth, with archaeology, with learning human history and anthropology. And I thought maybe that's the direction I want to go. Plus, they were making a lot of money in the field in oil exploration at the time. And a lot of my classmates were going on field trips to Arizona. And I thought that this is it. But all the while I was taking science classes, I kept finding my religion and philosophy classes to be the most interesting, to have the best professors raising questions about the meaning of life. And that just like was sucking me in. And the more I tried to look at doing other things, I was just called back into that field. And I think that that's how God kind of issues the call, so to speak. You look at what your interests are, what your talents are, what you're gifted for, what really kind of fires you up, and it kept leading me into the ministry.
The Japanese have a word ikagai, and in the West here they call it the four P's. It's what are you proficient at? What's your passion? What's your profit? I mean, what's your purpose? And then what you can profit at, because you got to make a living as well. I mean, that's part of it. And so when these four things, what you can do for the world, how you can make a buck, what your passion is, and what you're good at. If all of those things can combine, it is what the Japanese call ikagai.
I like that. And I think the Christians would call that a calling.
A calling. There you go.
And
And you found that.
and I think what becomes so significant, and maybe you experience that, is you find someone in that field that you look up to, that almost becomes, a model and a mentor. And when I was in high school, we got a new young youth pastor, a single guy that drove a TR6 convertible, and he was just cool. And we had a couple other pastors on staff that were close to retirement age, and I couldn't really see myself in a role following them. But now this new model for me was able to, show me that, this really could be an option that would fit my personality. And he told me one day, Alan, I really think that God is calling you into the ministry. And that's the first time I ever heard that. But he planted that seed. And so I think that that was the start of a 40 plus year career.
Wow. And you were a pretty good student, if I understand it.
I got straight A's all the way through high school and college and seminary, and academia just kind of fit. I like to write, and of course when you're taking philosophy and religion classes, it's all writing, and it
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
it just seemed to come easy for me.
Now you mentioned something there. You said seminary. There's a few people that wanted you to go with them, but you made an unusual choice.
at the point of then going to graduate school, I had to kind of make that decision. Did I want to go academia, which had always come easy, and maybe I would be a professor or I'd teach somewhere? Or did I want to go and be a parish pastor? That is what I felt was my calling. That was what I really wanted to do. But again, the world of prestige, of respectability, of making my parents proud is like, wow, if I was a college professor, that would be like another step notch higher. And after a great deal of prayer and deliberation, I went to St. Paul, Minnesota, and went to Lutheran seminary and studied to be a parish pastor.
Now, let's not be humble here. Who was looking for you? Who wanted you?
Well, I got accepted at both Harvard and Yale divinity schools, and I had that opportunity, and they were going to pay for a lot of it. So it was a tough decision, and I had to really search my heart on that one.
So let me get this straight. You had the opportunity to go where few people are asked, and to go there with at least a partial ride, if not a full ride. And you chose where? Minnesota?
St. Paul, Minnesota.
So what was that like? Was that an intentional choice to go into service rather than academia?
Exactly. It really was. I love people. I love working with people. I had a few opportunities to preach some sermons, and I really loved preaching. And I still envision within parish ministry getting to do a lot of teaching. So really it was the idea of having such an eclectic job involving so many areas of walking with people in life.
So where did the seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota lead you to?
Well, having grown up and spent my entire life on the West Coast, to go to St. Paul was like opening up my freezer and then like crawling in there and trying to survive.
It's a little chilly there.
Not used to that kind of cold, I tell you. But met some lifelong friends, met some great professors, got a good theological education, studied Hebrew and Greek, and learned how to apply it. And it was just a great experience, great education.
But you didn't stay there.
Well, I stayed there the 4 years, and then I got my very first church was in bright red Wyoming. Very conservative. Here's this liberal West Coast boy, and so I learned early on how to navigate the gospel and culture and where people are at, and how to push people along in their worldview and understanding without alienating or offending, and it ended up being a skill that would serve me well throughout my ministry. I was always the most liberal guy in my churches, but I was accepted. I didn't hide it, and I didn't offend other people, and they often would tell me, you're my only liberal friend.
Well, how do you account for growing up in California, that would probably account for some of it, but how would you account for your liberal leanings other than that experience of California?
I think having grown up with a spiritual and religious and church experience that was really profoundly grace oriented. We are saved by grace through faith, period. and everything kind of flows out of God's grace. And so the idea of fundamentalism, or checking your brain at the door when you go into church or have a religious experience, for me it was fully mind, body, and soul, and that had to resonate as a total package with what I was learning in science class and what I was reading in Genesis and how I understood the life and ministry of Jesus. It was always in more of that broader context that I think represents the best parts of liberalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you wound up where, in Washington? Yes.
Yeah. Well, after Wyoming, I went back to the Pacific Northwest, and I served my last church for 20 years. And it was the fastest growing Lutheran church in Western Washington. We had great success there in the most unchurched region of the United States. You know, we call it the what? The nun zone.
The nuns. Oh, because referring to the nuns, people that identify as nun, meaning when they're asked what religious doctrine do you follow, they say none. That's the nun zone.
That was the largest category of any particular group of people, were the nuns that just did not have a religious preference. So if you're going to do evangelism, if you're going to do outreach, it was important to recognize that we were in a post-Christian world. That seminary education I got taught me well to be the pastor in a church that no longer existed.
Yeah. Say what you mean by that.
When I grew up, when you grew up, we were in the midst of Christendom. It was simply the default world perspective. Everybody had some sort of, basic Christian understanding. We had Sunday school. We went to confirmation. There were 35 kids in my high school graduating confirmation class. And since those days, in the early 70s, we've seen a steady decline in church attendance, church affiliation, church involvement. And to this day, we now are in what is considered post-Christendom, where people just vaguely might know, do unto others, or love your neighbor as yourself. But it's more of a moral imperative rather than necessarily a divine or a biblical one.
Mm-hmm. But you had one of the most popular, one of the largest, quickest growing churches in the nun zone. And at the same time, you're saying we're in a post-Christian world, and the church that you were trained to lead isn't the church that you wound up leading. How did you manage that?
The key is being innovative, being flexible, assuming that when people come into your church, they don't know what you're talking about. So if I would ever use a term like justification or sanctification, I would always explain what I'm talking about. If I referred to a Bible story, I didn't assume that everybody knows it. I would give a quick recap of what happened in this story and try and make that, the hard part of homiletics is when you bring it home. All right, what does this have to do with me when I get up to go to work tomorrow? How can I use this? How does it apply? And we would do surveys of our neighborhood. I would read about other reports of surveys being done, and a lot were on why nuns were nuns. Why didn't people go to church? We would do our neighborhood survey and ask, are you affiliated? No. Why not? Why don't you come? And it was always one of four reasons given. They
one
were
of four.
Kind of the four barriers that kept people away.
Mm-hmm.
One, was that it was boring. The most boring hour of the week. Not interesting. They didn't like the music, whatever. So I made the conscious effort that we would try to have a Sunday morning that was not boring. It moved along. It had pace. It had variety, different styles of music, things that were visual, things that were audio, and I wanted people to be engaged. Sometimes I got accused of being, pandering to an entertainment consumer society. But the definition of the word entertainment is to keep one engaged. And so that was really the goal when you're preaching the gospel, is to hold people's attention, which is entertainment. Entertain, keep them engaged. The second reason that was given is that church is irrelevant. It doesn't really tie in or make sense or fit a 21st century mindset. What does Sunday have to do with Monday again? So I would try to really have every single week a solid theme that they would remember. I had little outline forms where they could fill out the blanks. And when they left, boomers like to take something with them, like, okay, I got something out of this hour. It was worth my time. I've got all this good stuff. And so trying to keep it relevant, tied in, that's the hard part of preaching. We can all talk about the first century and give a history lesson and set the context. Any good study Bible will do that for you. The hard part then is, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that look like? Give me some current examples of that happening. And it's also the most fun part.
Okay.
It's boring.
That boring?
Irrelevant.
And
the people are kind of cliquey.
Cliquey, yeah.
They're friendly, but they're more friendly to each other. It can feel like going into somebody else's family reunion, and you're just not really a part of it. So trying to, again, any ways that I could bridge that hospitality gap, we did it. And then the final one is, they only want my money. The church is just after my money. So I only talked about it a couple times a year. We would have like a pledge drive. We would talk about tithing. But then on a weekly basis, I didn't even pass the offering plates. We were the first mainline church in our area to stop passing the plates. And we just had a couple receptacles in the back where people could make a donation, and I let them know it was there, but there was no hard sell. So when that new person came and they didn't find those 4 barriers, that was highly impactful.
And, as you mentioned these 4 things, like I'm thinking of the first one, the entertainment one. Now, I'm thinking of a few churches where they have some real hot music and all the big videos and stuff like that. And people certainly are engaged. But the message at the same time lacks a little of the qualities that you're speaking of in the other 3. And the other 3 aspects. The preacher is still preaching something that may be straight out of the gospel and not particularly relevant. And I guess your experience says that it really doesn't cut it unless you have all of the 4. You gotta be touching on all of the 4.
And when you're talking about maybe the entertainment model, and when that dominates, which it did in the 80s when we got the start of the megachurches and Rick Warren and Bill Hybels and Robert Schuller, and you got these large growing megachurches that were very much attraction oriented. And what we're seeing is that model is no longer as effective now in 2025. There's been a lot of shifts. And the newer generations, that's not working for anymore. Going to a giant sports stadium and having the music and the lights and the dry steam and the show. There's really a longing for authenticity. To have a moment to quiet it down, to have some reflection, to recognize that some rituals are actually powerful when we participate together.
Intentionally. So, for example, one of those rituals might be taking communion. Yeah. Now, for a lot of people, the idea of getting a little piece of bread and a sip of some churches won't even give you wine. Wind up with grape juice, but it's a step away from our common sense for many people to think that they're really receiving something holy and sacred at that time. So how do you take a tradition like that and make it a communal ritual that is intentional and meaningful?
Again, to talk about our 21st century mindset versus a first century mindset, the idea of blood sacrifice is just appalling to our modern way of looking at the world. A blood sacrifice to appease an angry God. And so to simply try and explain Christianity through Jesus' sacrifice, through his death, as paying a price so God will love us and accept us as we are, we have to find different ways to talk about that. And so to see communion as blood and body broken and shed for you, that is sacrificial language that doesn't make sense to us. So exploring different ways to talk about God's love and to talk about Jesus willing to put his life on the line, to talk about there's no greater love to show for your neighbor than to offer one's life. And those things can start to resonate.
Let me see. Getting a bit more metaphorical?
Absolutely. And to allow space for mystery. And you got the guys working again, sorry. So to allow that space for mystery where fundamentalism craves certainty.
Yes.
Fundamentalism is sort of an answer to fear, and nothing like gives you shelter from fear like certainty. And so then to have that space open for God's experience to come with you that is really transcendent and causes reflection. And every time you participate in communion, you're receiving, different windows into the divine in ways that you can touch and feel. You can eat and smell. And Jesus is with us in those moments, in the bread and the wine, in a special way, just as he is with us in all of creation in unique ways.
In your sermons, you give the benediction the same way in each of your sermons. And I think that really speaks to the idea of God being with us. Would you share that with us? Your benediction?
And now as you go on your way, may God go with you. Before you, to show you the way. Behind you, to encourage you. Beside you, to befriend you. Above you, always to watch over. And within you, to bring you his peace, to fill your life with love, and to add to your every moment that abundant joy.
Mm.
It's kind of taken from that old Irish blessing, may the road rise up to meet you. And
and it gives you kind of a segue into that whole area of why do bad things happen to good people, and where was God when I was going through this terrible thing. And just to think, well, God may not micromanage things so that you don't have to experience pain, but knowing that he's always with you is a big piece of your message, yes?
Absolutely. The 23rd Psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. He doesn't promise to build a bridge over the valley or to, beam me up, Scotty, out of the valley. He promises to be with us in the valley of the shadow. And that's really the promise.
Mm. And you were just talking also, and I'm sorry to go back and forth, but it's just there's so many things that you say that cause thoughts to come up. But you were mentioning about certainty and mystery. I think that that's a big piece of it. And I wonder how the conservative view of Christianity and the liberal view of Christianity kind of map on to those different polar opposites. They're not polar opposites, but different places on some continuum. In other words, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think that folks who tend to deal with chaos by wanting certainty tend to be more fundamental and literal in their understanding of Christian faith, and those that are okay with mystery, even enjoy it as a space of potential, tend to be the more metaphorical and liberal end of Christian behavior.
And that's an easier leap for some than others. When you think about it, we all enter the faith as fundamentalists. We read the stories. As a kid, you go to Sunday school, you're taking things pretty literally. We don't really have the ability to see everything as metaphor or poetic. But then as we get older and we learn more and we start to put it in context and we learn more about the Bible, we kind of grow in our understanding of Scripture, which is really a library. And it has different books that have different contexts and different purposes and different authors. And you can't really compare John 3:16, for God so loved the world, with Leviticus food laws. They're not like of equal value in terms of our spiritual walk. That's distracting.
Wait, I tell you what, I hear the construction noise. I'm sure the audience does too, and I know that you do, and you're concerned about it. But let's do something. Let's go ahead and reveal what's going on, and that way we can all enjoy the construction sounds instead of worrying about them. So, if I understand correctly, you are actually extending your porch at your home.
Yeah, when I moved here 15 years ago, my idea, again, I was at my last church for 20 years, moved down here with a buddy to start a retreat center. And I really was going to kind of not do church. I didn't come down to Costa Rica to start a church or even to continue pastoral ministry. I was going to do something else at this point. And after about a year and meeting people, there just seemed to be a need. And they're like, Alan, can't you do something? And so I did. And we started a church. And that met for about 8 years until COVID hit. And we just closed down for a couple years. In that time, I had bought a house, and it was now time, well, let's start up church again as we kind of came out of that crisis. But and so I just started doing something on my front porch and would get like 30 people to come during, the high season. We pretty much filled it up. And so then the idea was, now, as I'm starting another church, to expand the area on my front porch to hold like 75 people, and have midweek gatherings and have potlucks and music nights. Now, Sunday mornings, we're going to be meeting at a different venue in Playa Hermosa. But then during the week, this will kind of be the church annex right here at my house.